Hello and welcome to Creating Disciples with me, Austin Roberts. We are thrilled to have you join us today, and we hope that the message that will be delivered today will be a blessing to you, and we hope the Lord brings His words to you through me. We're going to be taking a look at some of Jesus' words in the Gospel of John. As I'm sure you're well aware, Jesus was a man of prayer. He stayed in constant communication with his Father in heaven above. That comes doubtless as no surprise to you. So what we're going to do today is we are going to be taking a look at a part of one of the prayers of Jesus that we do find in the Gospel of John. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we hope the Lord blesses you through this message today. I'm sure you're familiar with the scenario. Perhaps you yourself have even lived it out at some point in your life. You can see it there play out in front of you. The little boy gets ready. It's his very first day of school ever. His parents have awoken him a little earlier than normal. He's gotten up. He's done his best, gotten dressed, put clothes on, shoes on. Mom has packed him a little lunch. He's gone down, he's eaten breakfast, he's gotten in the car because he is excited. He's excited to go out, to make new friends, meet new people, start learning new things in the classroom. Doubtless, it will be a wonderful experience today, tomorrow, and continuing on for the rest of his educational journey. Well, the drive gets going. They make the turns, get on the freeway, exit the freeway, and begin to pull into that driveway at the school where many, many other cars seem to be doing the same thing. There are children of various ages getting out of their cars, getting ready for school, and this little boy does just the same. He unbuckles his seatbelt, opens that door, and jumps out of that car. But it's his very first day, so he doesn't run off just yet. His mom and dad are there with him. They kiss him goodbye, and they watch him as he makes his way to the classroom. And then they stand there, tears in their eyes perhaps, and of course, as you probably would do, they begin to pray. They begin to pray for him, for his future, for the things he's going to learn, for the friends he's going to make, for the teachers he's going to have. And they pray, and they pray, and they pray for, well, you know. You've probably been there. Or perhaps consider a different scenario. She sits there on the couch, the young woman, as the months and the year perhaps has finally come to this one pinnacle. It's been a lot of planning. They've chosen a venue, they've chosen vendors, they've chosen food, they've chosen so many different things, the wedding dress, the suits, the bridesmaids, the groomsmen. Everything has finally come together, and they are there just before the final evening when she will get married. It'll be a few minutes, but pretty soon her bridesmaids, her close friends, will all take over that room. They'll take her out for one last night of celebration. They'll have a good time. They'll go eat. They'll do some fun things. But just for a few moments, she is alone. And so she kind of sinks down into the couch there in the room and kind of gets lost in thought a little bit. But before she gets too deep into her own thought, her father comes in. And they kind of sit there on the couch together, and they begin to talk about the many different things that have led up to this moment. And there's kind of this feeling of both joy and sadness. Joy for obvious reasons. She's getting married tomorrow. It's going to be the beginning of the rest of her life, married to a man whom she loves deeply and dearly. But sadness also. As her father looks upon her, she's moving to a new place with this person, will likely meet new friends and new people. And so it's bittersweet. There's kind of this joining of hands of joy and sadness. And a few moments later, the bridesmaids come in. They whisk her away to have a good time before she gets married on the morrow. And her father walks slowly back to his own hotel room and kind of sinks into his own couch there. And as he sits there alone, for everyone else is out doing different things, he begins to pray. And he begins to pray for, well, you know, she has a future ahead of her, a bright future, undoubtedly, but a future that will be touched with some difficulties along the path. There will be some unforeseen things that she and her new husband are going to have to work through, because that's what it's going to be like in a marriage. That's how any marriage is. And so he prays, and he prays, and he prays. And what does he pray for? Well, you know. Or perhaps those scenarios aren't as familiar to you, but you look upon her, another woman, holding back the tears as she helps her son prepare and pack all of his belongings up into a trunk or two as he's ready to head off. They've been very close throughout their whole lives. It's just been the two of them, really. And they pack and they talk and they go back and forth and they laugh and they sit there and they continue to work. And she finally looks upon him. They're ready, so they get in the car and they make the journey. The drive is a number of hours, but it is a drive full of joy and full of sadness altogether. And they finally arrive, and they get there, and they unload the trunks. She looks at him, her son, and he looks oh so good in that uniform. And off he will go, first to this place, and then to who knows where as he's called to be on duty. And it is very difficult for her to hold the tears back. As soon she will re-enter that car and drive those hours back to home. But finally it's time. And they share some tears and say their final goodbyes. And she gets in that car and begins to drive. And as she does, she begins to pray. She prays for a lot of things, for his future, his safety, for the people he will come to know, those brothers that will become oh so close to him. And she prays for, well, you know. We all know, I suppose, what it's like to pray for someone who's close to us, for someone who we love very deeply and dearly as they head off to new horizons, an uncertain future, things they will have not encountered before. And they pray. Now, if you're familiar with that, which doubtless many of you are, you will likely be familiar with another scenario. You can see him there sitting in and amongst 12 others. The itinerant rabbi, the preacher, surrounded by his own disciples. And he knows what the future holds for himself and really what the future holds for them. It will not be easy. It's going to be a life filled with difficulties, with hardships. In fact, all of them almost, will meet some untimely deaths full of pain, full of suffering. They will sacrifice much in their lives to come, because that's really what it means to follow him. That preacher, that rabbi, that Messiah, that Savior. So he does the same. He goes off to a secluded place and he himself begins to pray. And this prayer really is split up into different parts. And we're going to be focusing on one, the middle part. Now I'd like to invite you to open with me to the Gospel of John. We're going to be reading out of chapter 17. And that really is the background. It's Jesus. He's praying for his disciples for the life that is coming for them. Because although they have had a taste, they really don't understand the gravity and the difficulty of what lies ahead. It is going to be a treacherous road, a dark and dangerous future for pretty much all of them. So, we're going to read this text. And as we read it, I want you to think about that. Praying for those you love, praying for those who are near. So let's read it. John chapter 17. We will begin in verse 6. Jesus prays, I have revealed you to those whom you gave me out of the world. They were yours, You gave them to me, and now they have obeyed your word. Now they know that everything you have given me comes from you. For I gave them the words you gave me, and they accepted them. They knew with certainty that I came from you, and they believed that you sent me. I pray for them. I am not praying for the world, but for those you have given to me, for they are yours. All I have is yours, and all you have is mine. All and glory has come to me through them. So Jesus begins this prayer by praying for the subject matter, I suppose, of this prayer. He prays really about his disciples first. And he gives this plea to God about who these disciples are. And he really prays, if you notice, about three things in particular in this first part of the middle prayer. First, he prays about a sense of belonging. You can see it right there in the text. He knows to whom these people belong. He says right there in the text, they were yours, you gave them to me, and they have obeyed your word. So there's this sense of belonging for these disciples. They belong to God the Father. He gave them to Jesus. They belong. And Jesus knows that, and he knows that deeply, and he knows that well. Because a sense of belonging is important. And as he prays for these disciples, that is their reality. They belong. But secondly, moving on, he prays for their knowledge. Now, if you've read the Gospels, if you've read the story of Jesus and these disciples, knowledge is an interesting thing to pray for. Because these disciples are kind of bumbling at times, not the brightest people on the planet, and they seem to miss things. And they seem to miss things rather often. In fact, you see stories of particularly Peter who does that, and he just misses things. But despite this sense of perhaps inadequate knowledge, they know the most important thing. They know who Jesus is. They know he is the Messiah, the Savior, the Lord. And so he prays for that knowledge that it will grow. Because although they miss certain things and things that may be important, they know the most important thing. And then thirdly, and finally, he prays for their achievement. They will come to achieve great things as his disciples. In fact, you can see it there in verse 10. He says, and glory has come to me through them. And perhaps they don't even truly understand or recognize this achievement. Jesus says, listen, glory has come to me because of them, because of these people with whom you have surrounded me by. And Jesus understands that even if the disciples don't truly and really understand that, they will go on then to achieve great things. They will go on to spread the knowledge and the message of Jesus Christ throughout first the Jewish world and then the Gentile world. And that is no achievement to be taken lightly. So Jesus prays for these three things here, for these disciples and about these disciples. He says, listen, we've got these three things about these disciples, and I'm going to pray about these three things: the belonging, the knowledge, and the achievement. So these prayers are particularly about these disciples, characteristics that they hold and that they share. But let's continue on. Let's read the rest of this prayer. So once again, John chapter 17, this time we begin in verse 11, and we will go through verse 19, the rest of this portion of the prayer. Jesus prays, I will remain in the world no longer, but they are still in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me, so that they may be one as we are one. While I was with them, I protected them and kept them safe by that name you gave me. None has been lost except the one doomed to destruction, so that Scripture would be fulfilled. I am coming to you now, but I say these things while I am still in the world, so that they may have the full measure of my joy within them. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, for they are not of the world, and any more than I am of the world. My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. For them I sanctify myself, that they too may be truly sanctified. Now, it's a beautiful prayer that Jesus offers up on behalf of his disciples. And you can kind of get lost in the many words he uses, but I submit to you that there are 4 things in particular that Jesus prays for his disciples to have. So, 4 things. First, he prays for protection. You can see it there. He uses that word a few different times in this text. He uses it in verse 11, in verse 12, in verse 15. Lord, Holy Father, protect them. While I was with them, I protected them. My prayer is that you protect them from the evil one. So first, he prays for protection. Back when I was in high school, I did a side job during the school year and during the summer where I worked for the Loma Linda University Church Media Department. And it was a job I liked. I had some certain different tasks. I made some good friends. And one day, when work was finishing up, I had an appointment with my mom and sister, I believe, in Redlands. So I got in the car and I began to drive over there. I had not had my license for very long, and I didn't own my own car, so occasionally, if schedules allowed for it, my parents allowed me to borrow their cars. So I borrowed my dad's car, drove toward Redlands. Well, I was driving on the surface streets, and on the way, something strange happened, something I certainly did not expect. I was coming up on a stoplight, and so naturally, I took my foot off the throttle, off the gas, and began to press down on the brake. But something odd happened. As I pressed down on the brake, it appeared to me that the engine really revved up. So I took my foot off the brake, and the car really began to speed up. My foot wasn't pressing on either pedal, and I was like, uh-oh, this is not good. So I pressed down on the brake again, and the car indeed began to slow, but I could still hear that engine revving. The throttle was really pushing hard. So I looked down, and I could see there on the RPMs, it was hitting between 6,000 and 7,000 RPMs, and I was like, this is not right. The car shouldn't be doing this. Well, I got a little lucky. The light in front of me happened to turn green, and so I got in the right turn lane, made that right turn onto kind of a side street there, and as I did, I shifted the car from drive into neutral. And as I did that, the car began to slow, but even then I could still hear that engine revving hard. And so I got off, I kind of got to the side of the road, and it was still in neutral, so the car stopped all the way. And then I turned it off. I tried to turn it on one or two more times just to see what would happen, and again, that engine revved hard. And I thought, my goodness, what is going on? Well, here's the thing. I don't know why I took that road to Redlands. Normally, when I went from the church to Redlands, I would always take the freeway. It was about 5 o'clock that day, so the freeway would have been full of traffic. The surface roads themselves had a lot of cars on them, and I believe it is by the grace of God that I ended up taking a road I would almost never take. But you see, that's just the thing. God is looking out. He is protecting us. And that is just what he does and just what he asks for on behalf of the disciples in this text. He says, Lord, protect them from the evil one. So that's the first thing. Secondly, he prays for unity. He prays for the disciples to have a unified vision. And he knows that that's not always going to be easy. You're going to get some Peters and some Pauls, some people that will butt heads, people that aren't going to see eye to eye always. Well, I ran across a story in a devotional entitled Today in the Word, and I would like to read you this story that was in their devotional a number of years ago. It says, Jack Lipton, psychologist at Union College, and R. Scott Buglione, a graduate student at Columbia University, presented their findings on how members of the various sections of 11 major symphony orchestras perceived each other. The percussionists were viewed as insensitive, unintelligent, and hard of hearing, yet fun-loving. String players were seen as arrogant, stuffy, and unathletic. The orchestra members overwhelmingly chose loud as the primary adjective to describe the brass players. Woodwind players seemed to be held in the highest esteem, described as quiet and meticulous, though a bit egotistical. Now it's interesting how all of these different parts of an orchestra are perceived, and yet at the end of the day, if you have a good conductor, someone who leads them together, they can make beautiful music. And that's just what Jesus asks for from the Father. He says, Father, lead them. Give them unity. Give them a unified vision and goal. For they are going to butt heads sometimes. That is just human nature. But give them unity together. And so he's asked for two things thus far. Jesus has asked for, first, protection. It is a dark and dangerous world out there. There will be things that they will encounter that will be tremendously difficult. In fact, pretty much all of them will meet untimely, torturous, and difficult deaths. We read about disciples like Peter, who were crucified upside down, or John the Revelator, who was burned with boiling oil and tortured in that manner. They will have tremendous difficulty. So first, he prays for protection. He says, I know you can't protect them from everything, but please protect them. Secondly, he prays for unity. He says, listen, even within the church there are going to be difficulties because that's just the nature of humanity. Give them the ability to work together even if they don't quite see eye to eye on every single issue. So please help them. Help them work together. But then he continues on and he prays for a third thing. He prays for joy. And joy is an interesting thing to pray for, I think. It seems almost a little out of place compared to the other things, but if we think about it, it's just as important. Attitude, being joyful and being happy in all situations, even the most difficult ones that they will encounter, will be tremendously important. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to go along on a trip to Ethiopia that was sponsored by the Tropical Health Alliance Foundation. And the Tropical Health Alliance Foundation had sponsored an ophthalmologist to go down there and do cataract surgeries on some of the people in Ethiopia so they could see. And if they could see, then they would be able to work. And if they could work, they would be able to provide for their families. And that was tremendously important because if they can't see, there goes any chance of any money. Well, we were down there and I was supposed to be part of the film crew. So I filmed some of these cataract surgeries and some of these people and what was going on, and it was amazing. Well, on some of the evenings, we had the chance to play with some of the children. So that's what I did. I went out and played soccer on a field with some of these kids. We were in a city called Dembidolo, which even by Ethiopian standards is considered extremely poor. They have almost no money. And the field we played on was really not good. It was like packed dirt in some places, grass in other places, overgrown grass in some places. It was uneven, it went up and down. The goals that were there were just sticks that had been put into the ground to kind of mark the place. If you kicked the ball too hard in one direction, it would go off a cliff into the forest and would be very, very difficult to find. But I remember being out there and playing with a soccer ball that appeared to be 100 years old. But there was nothing but joy. The kids, the people who were out there, just loved it. They were having a wonderful time, and they were full of smiles and laughter and happiness, despite the fact that they had next to nothing. The amount of money that some of these people made in a year is probably less than I make in a couple weeks. But despite the tremendous hardships that they faced, they were joyful. And that is the type of joy that Jesus is praying for these people, for his disciples. He's saying, Lord, they're going to encounter situations that are tremendously difficult. Give them joy, oh God. Give them happiness. So that's the third thing here. First, he's prayed for protection. They're going to face some dangerous situations. So Jesus says, oh God, protect them as best as you can and help them. Secondly, he says, I know because of human nature there is going to be some difficulties within the church. So give them unity. Help them to work together for a common goal and a common end. And thirdly, give them joy. They are going to encounter situations that are difficult and that are hard. So give them joy, give them happiness. But then there is a fourth and final thing that he prays for here. And he prays for sanctification. Once again, you can see it there in the text. He uses that word a lot, particularly in the last couple of verses. Sanctify them by the truth. For them I sanctify myself. They too may be truly sanctified, Jesus says. Excuse me. He prays for sanctification. And what that means is he's praying for his disciples to be made holy. And he's saying, God, come, make these men holy. Be with them, for they have been given the highest of tasks, to make disciples of all nations. So be with them, make them holy. Well-known author and theologian C.S. Lewis tells a story of his childhood. And he tells of times that he would have a toothache. And he says he knew that if he told his mother that he had a toothache, she would give him some medicine so that he could sleep that night without so much pain. But Lewis says that he would hold off on doing that for as long as he possibly could and try to endure as much pain as humanly possible before he would go tell his mother. Because he knew that the moment he told his mother that evening, she would help him. She would give him something, some medicine, so he could sleep. But he knew that the next morning, there would be a trip to the dentist. And he said when he went to the dentist would start poking around in there and messing with teeth that didn't ache yet and doing different things, and he hated that. He did not want to go to the dentist. But being sanctified, I suppose, is kind of like going to the dentist. Because when something hurts, when there's a sin in our own lives, God is going to help us fix that if we ask him to. But then he's going to start messing around in there with some of our other sins that maybe don't hurt yet, that maybe we aren't ready to have fixed yet. But that's what God does. He makes us holy. He sanctifies us. He fixes the problems that are within us if we are willing to have them fixed. So Jesus prays for these 4 things for his disciples. He says, "O Lord, protect them. Be with them in these dark and dangerous times and dark and dangerous world." But don't only do that. God, also give them unity. They're going to have some issues internally, so give them a common goal. Help them realize that. And then thirdly, oh God, give them joyfulness and happiness so they can face these difficult situations with a smile on their faces. And finally, God, sanctify them. Make them holy. The truth is, Jesus prays the same prayer for you and me and everybody. And I suppose it's up to us to accept that prayer and that great encouragement from Christ. So thank you for being with us today. We hope you have been blessed by this program and that you join us